next topic I have, which is depth perception. I will go a little bit into that. This is covered in chapter 10 of the Mather book. Depth perception is a very important topic for virtual reality, right? So we like to think that one of the biggest differences in looking at a screen compared to looking through a head-mounted display is that we can provide to you depth perception through stereo, but it's not completely true that that's the most important distinguishing feature. We get depth information from many sources, and I want to make sure that's very clear. So depth perception. This is, by the way, a very general pattern in perceptual psychology, is there's something perception. So we have depth perception. We'll talk next about motion perception. There's some other things I won't have a lot of time to talk about, but we could talk about scale perception. We can talk about color perception. Right, so this is just a template here, if you like. So if you want to study more of these things later, it'll follow the same mentality. So we will be studying what are called depth cues. And again, in this pattern, cues over and over and comes up again. So if I'm studying motion perception, then I'll talk about motion cues. So cues are somehow pieces of information that trigger the brain to perceive whatever it is that we're trying to perceive, right? What is the key information that we need? What are these features that are going to be used? There's going to be two different kinds of depth cues. One nice way to separate them is into what I'll call metric and ordinal. In other words, metric is going to be varying continuously with distance. And ordinal is about ordering, as the name suggests. For example, near to far. So what is in front of what else? Another way to maybe name these, number one could be maybe continuous, if you like, and number two could be combinatorial, right? It could appeal to the computer scientist in you if you have that background. So again, the thing I want to emphasize is that there is a multiplicity of depth cues right, so not just stereo. When you look at panoramic images, for example, if you've had a chance to look at those in the lab, they may look quite three-dimensional, even though the same image is being presented to both of your eyes. So why is that, right? So we need to talk about that. All right, so I will go through some examples. One, retinal image size. Right? So how far away it is may have to do with how much of your retina the image takes up, combined with your knowledge about what it is you're looking at. Right? So assuming you're looking at something familiar. Let me give some pictures here. So for example, just based on the size of that hand as an image on your retina, in the context of a person standing there behind, you make some inferences about how close, right? Does the woman have an enormous hand in the image on the left, or is it just closer? You don't see an arm there really. It's the same picture either way. Right? So you're making some inference about depth, and you're not using stereo. Again, what's the size of the image in the retina? So we know maybe how large a tree should be, and so if we see two trees and one is further away, so on the right there it shows that the smaller tree is perceived to be further away simply because it occupies a smaller region of the retina. Another thing we can look at is height in the visual field. So let me write that. Height in visual field. So we didn't change the size of the person there. We just changed their height in the visual field. There's a horizon line And so it appears that the man at the top is further away. So that kind of information we're also using. Here's another one. Where is the spear going to hit, right? I guess there's also some size changing there as well. Actually, a combination of two of them, I would say, because there's height in the visual field, but there's also differences. I don't think the elephant should be smaller than the animal in the front. So. Texture gradients and perspective. Texture gradients and perspective is a part of this. May not be a perfect texture. So we have some examples of that. You perceive depth, right, just from the street stones in this painting. It's a lot of perspective near the top there. In fact, it looks a bit excessive, but at least from the tiles on the ground, you can see you get some idea of depth. You get ideas of depth from this, right? Just an arrangement of lily pads. So again, it's depth from this kind of texture gradient. Again, there's a kind of texture here, a texture gradient. Another one is image blur. So it looks in this one that the blurry parts are farther away, right? So further away. Just by the way we've drawn this image, we perceive the pink flower to be closer. In this case, we have blurring up in the front. We perceive the garden gnome to be further away. This is a case before. Another one is atmospheric. Atmospheric perspective. So the hazy mountains in the distance, right, seem to be further away, so it's some additional cue. This one's great. Shadows, let's see, 6. Shadows or shading. So in the top picture, I perceive the balls to be going further and further away, right, as we go from left to right. But in the bottom picture, I perceive them to be at the same depth, but just different heights in the air, right? And the only difference between the top and the bottom is how the shadows are rendered. So clearly, you're using some additional information from the shadows to help you reason about depth. It's happening all the time for us. You can also look at these shadings to figure out whether it's a cylindrical shape just from the way the shading works here. So in addition to just straightforward shadows, there's just shading across the object. Is the one on the left an inward cylinder or outward cylinder? I'm not sure we can tell. There may be ambiguities there. It looks like the other two are a little bit clearer maybe. I'm not sure, so maybe the last one looks clear. That one looks outward, right? So be careful with those, but you do get some depth information. Another one is interposition. Right, so I perceive the yellow disk to be closer than the red square, which is closer than the green triangle. So we get some kind of depth ordering. That's an example of ordinal information. And the same kind of thing is happening in this complex picture, right? So there's a lot of boats out there, people in the front waving, but we get a lot of information just from the ordering and not necessarily using any of the other cues. In this particular case, there's not a lot of extra information there, but we start to infer about various sailboats and where they're located with respect to each other from this interposition. So let me give a few more here. Goes on and on, doesn't it? 8, accommodation. And this we talked about before, right, is this refocusing of your eye. So just based on your brain's knowledge that your eye has had to refocus, you perceive something as being closer. Now, if you mess that up with your head-mounted display by making everything appear to be at infinity all the time, you've lost this cue. What's the effect of that? I don't know. Someone should study it. People have studied it, but there's still a lot of unknowns. So you're losing that cue. Many people would argue that's a very important cue to keep for depth, maybe more important than stereo. Motion parallax. Motion parallax. So if I move back and forth, I guess I need to hold some kind of object stationary here, but if I hold the station and I go back and forth, then I see this object passing in front of you who are further away at a faster rate, right? So the objects at varying depths intermingle in a certain way where the closer objects are moving more quickly as I move back and forth, right? Very important, motion parallax. That's important for visual sense, it's important for your audio sense, so it shows up in other places. So it's important here as well. Now if I have a head tracking algorithm that's running with sensors and such for a head mounted display, if I can only rotate, I get some motion parallax if I simulate the translation of my pupils, still using rotation, but if I move like this, I will not get motion parallax. So if I look at a panoramic display and it was taken by a panoramic camera at some fixed location, and then I start trying to do these parallax motions, I will not get this beautiful arrangement of objects moving back and forth. So you will lose that if you capture a panorama with a stationary camera, right? So you lose that bit of information. So it's very important to have that, but that gets lost in that case. And finally, number 10, I save this for the end, the obvious one, which is a stereo cues. So what are these? There's the vergence angle, right? So your brain knows how your eyes are oriented, how much they've converged, so you have a signal for that. You have what's called binocular disparity. So how different are the images between the two eyes? Now there won't be, because your eyes are rotating, it won't be the same as if I just had two cameras facing forward and then I move them apart to get stereo. I'm not rotating the cameras to face the object like I would. My eyes actually rotate to face the object of interest. Your cameras would not, right, unless you put some special motors on them to rotate them. So be a little bit careful. So in doing stereo computer vision, you get a very large displacement. When we're talking about the human eyes, they're rotating and converging to fixate on the object of interest, but there's still some disparity in the images, right, even though they cannot look identical because you're looking at them from two different perspectives. So that's what I mean by this binocular disparity. It's not as much as it is in the engineered case, but nevertheless your brain can detect that information. There's diplopia, which I mentioned earlier. If I fixate on some close object, then there are multiple images in the periphery. That's additional information. Couple of more things I'll say about stereo. You have to pay very close attention to what's called the interpupillary distance, or IPD. The IPD in the real world becomes very important if you're going to place lenses in front of your eyes, right? Then you have to line them up correctly so that your eyes are centered when you're looking forward. That's the best you can do. If you don't get that right, if you do not have adjustments for this, do we have adjustments for those in the lab? It doesn't look like it. So if your IPD is far from the average, which you might not even know this, what your IPD is. Most people don't know this. My IPD happens to be lower than most. So I can remember maybe the 15th percentile or 10th percentile or something. So my eyes are actually close together. You know, who would have thought? I have no, compared to the world average. So so that's one question, is are you looking through the center of the lenses? That's very important for the optical part of a head mounted display. Another interesting question is, in virtual reality now, have I matched, if you believe you're in a perfectly scaled world, have I matched the interpupillary distance perfectly, or is it too small or too large? If you make it very, very large in virtual reality, you will feel like a big monster or something, right? You may look like Godzilla or something. So you can make an entire city look very small or feel very small. You move your head around and you know, it looks like it's been miniaturized, right? If you make your IPD very small, you might feel like you've become tiny, right? So there are some applications people have written where you can make yourself feel like you're suddenly maybe 10 centimeters high, right? And so part of the way to achieve this is by decreasing the interpupillary distance. So that definitely has a lot to do with your perception of depth and your perception of scale. Let's see here. This figure just shows what's called the horopter, which is the region when you fixate, it's the stereo region that you get. So a common stereofocal region when you consider the clear images projected onto the retina. There's, you know, remember we did all this study of focal planes. This is showing the stereo focal surface that's common for your two eyes. There's the calculated theoretical surface for that, and then there's what's been determined empirically, which doesn't seem to match exactly. I personally don't know why they don't match, so I don't know what theories there are for that, but that's what we get. And this may also provide some motivation for people advertising curved displays, perhaps. If you sit exactly in the right place, then it may give you a perfect perception, but you know, who knows. Let's see, are there any questions about anything I've gone over today? I'll leave you with one final optical illusion just for final surprises, but see if you have enough background to explain why this might be occurring. Does that look strange to you? So this is the it's called the cafe tile illusion. All of those lines are horizontal, right? Going back and forth, but they seem to be bending, don't they? But they're not. So I'll leave you with one optical illusion there to think about. So that's it for today. Thanks.